For this section of the learning, I'd like to share with you the models of instruction that we will be talking about and that will be most familiar to you when we talk about differentiated instruction. Accommodations, differentiated instruction, DI, and universal design for learning. And sometimes we refer to that as UDL. First, let's take a look at accommodations. Specifically, when we look at accommodations, we are looking at changes to the instruction that are specifically developed as a result of, we term it specially designed instruction, SDI, through the IEP process or through a 504 plan. We know that these accommodations are considered reasonable by the team. Those are modifications or changes that can be made to the instruction or the assessment that can be conducted typically within the regular classroom. Now, sometimes we look at SDIs. You'll see when we look at the accommodations and, for example, if a child has other health impairment as their disability and their testing requires small group testing or a quiet location, sometimes those cannot be achieved within the classroom setting. So a child may be removed to a smaller area to achieve that specially designed instruction. But typically, the SDIs, those accommodations that we list, can be achieved within the regular classroom. And that's always the goal. We know that these are individualized. The accommodations are for specific children, and they are required legally. So we know that it's driven by the IEP process. And SDIs, as driven by the IEPs and 504 plans, we know can be temporary, or they may become more permanent as a child continues on through the grade levels. Now, when we specifically talk about the idea of differentiating, and we use the term differentiating instruction, this is a concept that should be familiar to you as a regular educator, because the term differentiating instruction, it's a term that we've used now for a number of years, and we look at using differentiated instruction in the regular classroom. It's not for a specific child. Differentiating is for everyone. And differentiation, specifically, we're looking at what type of instruction is necessary based upon the formative assessments that are conducted. So it's data-driven. We know that we're going to take a look at the data to help us make the determination of how we will differentiate. We know that we're going to look at the entire group, and we're going to analyze based upon who we have in our classroom and what the needs are of the group, individuals within that group. When we differentiate, we tend to use flexible grouping, and we group students throughout the year. We can group by interest, we can group by needs, we can group by ability, and specifically when we differentiate, I'm thinking of the content area of reading. Sometimes we might have a flexible group for phonics in a 3rd or 4th grade classroom that would look different than a flexible group for process writing. And after an assessment is conducted, then we would take a look at reconfiguring those groups and differentiating. We know that we have to have different types of methods, summative assessments, and again, it must be flexible. So when we differentiate, it will look different for different children within the room, different groups. I know that many of you are familiar with response to intervention, RTII. It's actually a response to intervention and instruction. Also, we take a look at the multiple intelligence theory as supporting this concept of differentiating. But response to intervention and instruction tells us that children, based upon their cognitive abilities, based upon their developmental abilities, may be at different places within the same grade level. So chronologically, the children may all be in 3rd grade, but some children may need more support based upon their needs. And we know this based upon the assessments that we use in response to instruction and intervention. And many of our elementary schools use a DIBELS to help us look at the language arts component. And there is a math component for that as well. So we get a baseline, and then we hit benchmarks. Many people use begin, middle, and end with their benchmarks, and sometimes we see benchmarks 5 times a year. Foresight is another tool that's used to help us develop those benchmarks and take a look at progress for our children and how we should group our children and differentiate for them accordingly. Multiple intelligence theory by Gardner is a theory that supports differentiation based upon children's interests and their, as Gardner said, their giftedness or their intelligence in some of the different areas: musical intelligence, mathematical intelligence, spatial intelligence, interpersonal skills, interpersonal skills. All these are various areas of giftedness, and those are 5 of the 9 that Gardner tells us about. So we could group our students based upon Gardner's theory of intelligence. So again, differentiating for all the children within the classroom. The last concept that I want to reiterate to you and share with you is universal design. And some of you have heard me talk about this before. For some of you, it's new. When we talk about universal design, we talk about Universal Design for Learning, UDL. And in your folder this week, there will be a couple of sites for you to take a look at. And you can see how universal design is a concept that we can use, that teachers can use to plan for all of their children. And it's a proactive approach that teachers can use. It does anticipate the needs of all the children. And it's multimodality in presentation, motivation, and assessment. There are a variety of ways that those are incorporated into the lesson so that all children can participate and be successful. And that's really the ultimate, is if we could all be planning with UDL in mind, Universal Design for Learning. It's very simple. It requires intuitiveness on the part of the teacher. And when we do it correctly over time, we know that we have fewer errors, and it requires less physical effort as well, because we've already put the planning into it up front for our students. Again, that concept is universal design, or UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Those are the 3 concepts that I wanted to share with you and talk with you a little bit about, and that's accommodations, differentiated instruction, DI, and universal design for learning.